Lettuce was sacred to the god men because it was thought to have aphrodisiacal qualities. That is, it helped ensure that love was in the air, so to speak. Absolutely. This was a very necessary function of the principle of life, a continuation. The chief act was the running of the bounds, and this is so interesting what he says on page 87. The king symbolically reaps the first ears of emmer wheat and then presents them to the god. According to Frankfurt, and this is the important point, this is the idea of the Feast of Men. This is the climax of the Feast of Men. The king and the queen had ritual sexual intercourse at this stage of the ceremony, with the king taking the role of men, and the ceremony ended with the release of the 4 arrows in the 4 cardinal points of the compass. This carries news to men's festival that everything has been renewed, regenerated. The life goes on. This is the idea of our figure men in our facsimile.
Now, here's our facsimile 2, figure 7 again. I've got my scriptures with me. Always take your scriptures with you, even camping. They're a delight. I also have an article in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies by Marie-Louise Boule. It's The Goddesses of the Egyptian Tree Cult. This is for 1947. She describes how, on page 97, she says, this figure on this throne. Now this throne, this is the cube. This throne is a cube. It's the cube of space, and I'll discuss that a little bit with you too. She says, Isis, whose name Isit, according to Satha, means seat or throne. There's our goddess. She appears to have been regarded as the personification of the king's throne. She sometimes has the epithet Isit Weret, which in Egyptian is a term for the king's throne. And in the pyramid texts, she was identified with the place to which the dead was brought in the sky. She brings him to the great throne which is made by the gods, which is made by Horus, which Thoth has produced.
So Isis is the throne, the goddess. Isis is also men's consort. She's symbolized by this throne. It's interesting that Men is the father. His cult goes way back into antiquity. Nibley described that extensively in his book Abraham in Egypt. But he's also married to Isis. Isis, the consort. You have father, mother, and son. Horus is the son. It's fascinating that it's a family relationship. And the principle of the regeneration, the life force, the idea of eternal lives, as Joseph Smith put it, is the perpetuation of us in the eternities. The priesthood, the grand key words of the Holy Priesthood, is all about eternal lives in the eternities. And it's symbolized by the most obvious way. How are you going to symbolize fertility with a male? It's the same thing with the Venus Willendorf Mother Goddess figurines, of course. It symbolizes abundance, fertility, living life. This is the idea. I have another source I want to share with you. Real quick. This is C.J. Bleecker, The Pattern of the Ancient Egyptian Culture. This is in the scholarly journal Newman, number 11 for 1964. He's saying on page 79, this discussion of Mot. The discussion of Mot as a notion of world order, law, justice, etc. And this brings in our facsimile number 3. This was my Sunstone presentation for 2005. The idea of Joseph Smith associating King Pharaoh and Prince of Pharaoh with Mot and Isis. Yes, of course, because they personified the order. They had to keep chaos at bay, and so they adapted the goddesses' functions that had to do with order, law, homogeneity, etc. Mot must continually be actualized by men, in the first place by Pharaoh. Well, there you go. That's our facsimile number 3. He says, He was fully qualified for the task because he was considered to be the son of the sun god. Very important. Pharaoh is the son of Re, the sun god. Each pharaoh repeated the primeval deed of the sun god, the ascension to the throne. This is our figure 7, see? This is an ascension text in that respect. The ascension to the throne, this was indicated by a verb which was used for the sunrise, both in primeval time and each morning. From the divine origin, the pharaoh derived his absolute authority and his great power. Men was lifted upon a staircase. This is so interesting because in the rite, the pharaoh was a reaper. And that's what I just read to you, the reaper of emmer wheat at the festival of men. The staircase was the symbol of resurrection. So men has to do with the resurrection. This is symbolized by the wedge-out eye that the bird snake figure is presenting to men in our figure 7. The wedge-out eye is the pupil of the eye of Re. The entire hypocephalus is considered to be the pupil of the sun god. So we have this connection also. This is the renewal of the dignity of the king, as a sign of which 4 birds were set free, each in the cardinal directions. I mean, that was the festival of men. So that's C.J. Bleecker, and it brings in the principle of Joseph Smith associating the mortals with the immortals. Yes, of course. That's the whole principle of the divine, is to unify us with the divine. And how is that done? How is that done? Well, I've got a study that'll knock you out here. This may take some doing here. This is Moshe Weinfeld, a fine Hebrew scholar. Feminine features in the imagery of the God of Israel, the sacred marriage, and the sacred tree. This is in the scholarly journal Vetus Testamentum, number 46, 1996. He has a lot of ideas that, well, concerning Yahweh and his Asherah. And of course, this brings in the Hyros Gamos and the discussion of the Hyros Gamos. And the marriage of the God, the Holy One, with the Shekinah. He says that on page 515 and 516. And then he's discussing the tree of life. The sacred marriage is alluded to in many places in the scriptures. The sacred marriage of the God. Now, see, this is the depiction in our figure 7. With men on that throne. He is united. He is intimately united with Isis. It's symbolized. You don't see Isis as the female. But it's very interesting. The snake bird figure, it's a snake in the Egyptian pantheon. In our hypocephalus, most people have thought it's a bird, Michael Dennis Rhodes and Guy and Nibley. But it's an incomplete drawing. The snake figure, it's usually a snake with legs. Sometimes it's a baboon that presents that wedge-out eye, as we've seen. The idea of the snake is Necheb cow, and she is a goddess also. So the goddess and the gods are intimately connected in our figure 7, along with Isis, the throne, as the wife of men himself. This is the Hyros Gamos. And the encephalic nature of men is not meant to be pornography. This is not dirty, illicit, wicked, immoral sexual gratification. No. This is the perpetuation of life. The sacred life. Life is sacred. How do you perpetuate it? Through the way we are created, in God's image. And Weinfeld says that. The bride of the Shekinah is the Holy One. He says that on page 517. Human intercourse, as it were, imitates the intercourse of the Holy One with the Shekinah. The sacred marriage guarantees fecundity and fertility in the universe, whereas human intercourse brings offspring. And fertility and fecundity in the universe